Welcome back. We're now turning our attention to the 4th Congressional District, which covers most of Fairfield County and a small section New Haven County. 2 weeks ago, we talked with Republican Jamie Stevenson, who's running for the seat. Today, Representative Jim Himes, the incumbent, joins us. He is the Democrat. He's held that job since 2009. Congressman Himes, thank you for being with us here on CT'22.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
Is there a point in the last 2 years or at some point where you said, I need to keep doing this work, I need to run for re-election, there's more that's left undone, something that you can point to and say, that's when I decided?
Yeah, I can point to a couple things. Number one, when we finally got an infrastructure bill done, we've been talking about it forever through the 4 years of the Trump administration. It became a joke, right? Is this infrastructure week? Is this infrastructure week? And I highlight that for you, Eric, because there's probably no single thing that is quite as important to Southwestern Connecticut, to my congressional district, where, look, I know traffic is bad in Hartford, but come, Friday night, 4 o'clock, come be on 95 or the Merritt. And, it's the single thing that is an otherwise strong economy down here in Southwestern Connecticut. It's the single thing that's holding me back. So I said, we need to make sure that the biggest investment in our infrastructure since the Eisenhower administration gets deployed in a smart, forward-looking way so that we can continue to thrive economically the way that we need to down here.
We did have your challenge round a couple weeks ago, and one of the things she pointed to is that she feels you have a voting record that's too in touch with party leaders and that you're not properly representing the people of your district and you've lost touch with them. Have you heard that on the campaign trail, and how do you respond to it?
No, I haven't. And that's the generic attack, right? And she knows that that's not true. I've had the great good fortune and privilege of getting reelected by very substantial margins in this very moderate district in Connecticut many times. She also knows that when it comes time to stand up against my party leaders, I will do so. And I've got a long record of doing so, going back to when Barack Obama personally asked me for permission to attack Syria, and I said no to my support for free trade when I was one of the few Democrats who stood up and said we ought to trade more with Asia. So no, look, I've been around this block a few times before, and they throw the spaghetti against the wall to see what will stick. But that's not one that's going to stick.
Well, if that's the generic attack, you may be the only incumbent Democrat who was accused of not doing enough to codify abortion rights. That came up in a debate recently from your opponent. How do you respond to that? Because that certainly is an unusual position for an incumbent Democrat to be in.
Well, I'll tell you what, talk about throwing spaghetti against the wall. If my opponent were to win this seat, it would be a unique and historical moment in 245 years of American history, because she would be the first person who ever won a congressional seat by accusing the incumbent of not doing enough to counter her party's core partisan objectives. Again, you sort of scratch your head. But look, at the end of the day, I am not so focused on the spaghetti that my opponent is throwing. I'm much more focused on something that we haven't talked about, which is we have a lot yet to do. Eric, down here, look, I said the economy is very strong. We also have hugely challenged communities in places like Bridgeport that take up an immense amount of appropriately of my attention. We have a lot of work to do down here. We have a lot of work to do collectively. To your last point about my opponent's ridiculous charge that I should have done more to stop her party. The Supreme Court is now in the business of taking away Americans' rights, right? Regardless of what you think about abortion, and I respect people who think differently than I do, the Supreme Court is now in the business of taking away our rights. That requires a champion to say, no, we're not going to do that. And Eric, I'll also make the point that while my opponent sort of sounds moderate on these issues, and I give her credit for it, her party is threatening our democracy. More than half of the congressional and senatorial candidates in the Republican Party are election deniers. And it pains me that that's where we are, but that too requires a fighter to say, no, we are going to stand up with clarity for this country's democracy.
We mentioned in the intro that you've held this seat for many terms now. Can you look back at that first election to this one? Have you felt a change in the district, and as you make a pitch to voters, the things they're interested in, or just maybe how they're getting their news? It feels like politics has shifted to me. Does it to you as a candidate?
Politics have absolutely shifted, and I've been very serious about trying to counter the way in which politics have shifted. They've become much more extreme. In some instances, dangerously extreme. Along with Rosa DeLauro, I was in the chamber on January 6th when, hundreds of people who were convinced by the lie that Donald Trump had won the election brutalized police officers, broke windows with the objective of killing not just Democrats, but the vice president of the United States of their own party. That, Eric, if that's not a sign of a deeply diseased politics, I don't know what is. And this is a fairly moderate district down here in southwestern Connecticut. And, it's been a challenge, right? Because I have always been willing, as we discussed before, to compromise with Republicans on tax policy, on trade policy, you name it. We get things done in this country through compromise and civil negotiation. But when it comes down to the question of whether it is okay to attack the global symbol of democracy, to perpetuate a lie that Donald Trump is the legitimate president, I'm sorry, I'm not compromising on that. I'm going to be clear and I'm going to be ardent on that because our democracy is worth it.
I do want to just switch gears. Sometimes the news gets in the way of these election pieces. You just came back from a trip to Ukraine. We only have about 2 minutes left in our time here, Congressman. Can you just tell us, what did you learn? Is there anything you can pass on where things stand there with your own eyes?
You know, it was a remarkable trip, Eric, and I was just so thrilled and privileged, although it was a little nerve-wracking to be in Kyiv. With my Republican counterpart on the Intelligence Committee, by the way, Mike Turner of Ohio, back to your question about bipartisanship, we were there to tell President Zelensky and to tell everybody in Ukraine that that the vast majority, and I really do mean the vast majority of Americans and of the United States Congress, continues to support lots of aid to Ukraine because we recognize that this is our fight, right? It may be the Ukrainians who are fighting and dying, but standing up against totalitarian, brutal dictators, that's our fight. So that was the purpose. And I got to tell you, if I might just take 10 seconds, talking to just regular Ukrainians in Kyiv, this is a city that gets hit by 6 missiles a day. And you know what? You're standing there, and the next thing you know, the person you were talking to has been killed. To a person, they said, this ends when every single Russian is off every inch of Ukrainian land. And I got to tell you, that inspired me more than probably anything I've seen in years.
Well, I appreciate that update. We have about 30 seconds left. Let's get back to the election, make a final pitch to voters why they should send you back to the Capitol for another term.
Sure. Look, we've made great progress, right? We cut prices for the pharmaceuticals that our senior citizens buy. We passed the biggest investment in infrastructure ever. We passed the biggest investment going after climate change ever. And, you know, making sure that that gets done, that there's good accountability, that the projects are smart, that we preserve our democracy, and that we turn back the instinct that the Republican Party has to take away our rights. That's my job for the next 2 years.
All right, Congressman Jim Himes running for re-election. We appreciate you being with us here on CT'22.
Thank you, Eric.
With that, we have now spoken to all the major party candidates running for Congress. If you want to watch the interview of the candidates in your district, all you have to do is head to WFSB.com. We have a section with links to all of our conversations. That is CT'22 for this week. CBS Sunday Morning is up next. Have a great rest of your weekend. We'll meet you back here in Studio A next Sunday morning.